Hello, I'm Scott Soshnick.
And I'm Eben Novy-Williams, and this is the Path to Profitability sports business podcast, the Sporticast.
Wait, the Path to Profitability?
I messed that up. I meant to say drive to profitability.
Oh, okay.
As
I was
drive to survive.
Yeah,
joke,
yeah.
I totally messed it up.
There we see, Kurt. I love others let this go. I'm like, obviously we're going to talk F1, and he's like, the path to I'm like, what? Like, is he implying that in some way that these teams are not profitable or the series is not profitable? Didn't make any sense to me, and now I know why, because Novy-Williams messed it up.
I was expecting maybe Inside the Paddock Club podcast or something.
Yeah, exactly. The Paddock podcast, something. See, maybe we need a new co-host.
Do we want to just scratch the whole thing and restart?
No. We are not scratching this at all. The whole world is like, path to profitability. Like, what?
Oh, God.
What? All right, well, the cat's out of the bag. We're discussing Formula One because Mr. Badenhausen took his talents to the paddock, and it's the first time, the inaugural. I hate when people say first annual. Does that bother you, Kurt?
Oh, 100%.
All right, yeah, I hate first
inaugural.
Yeah, you tell everybody it's not an annual until you've done it, and then it's the second annual. That's fine, but do not call it first annual. The inaugural F1 valuations, no surprise, Ferrari atop the list. But why don't you give me top line, Kurt, what you found and any surprises? We'll start with that.
Yeah, no surprise. Ferrari on top, $3.1 billion. People told me it is not buyable. It's unsellable. It's one of those unicorn franchises. Hasn't won 15 years, but they still sit alone on top. Rounding out the top three probably wouldn't surprise people. Mercedes, number 2, 2.7. Red Bull right behind them, 2.42. Those two have dominated in terms of wins over the last decade. And Red Bull's been running away with things since the start of 2022. I think what surprised me and what a lot of the talk is right now is to Evan's point, profitability. The flip has been, the switch has been flipped, and it's maybe not on yet, but the dimmer is going up as teams work through these cost caps and what it means in terms of making money. Because the reality was that this was a billionaires club where people just became millionaires because they were flushing money away. There was very few profits in the sport outside of one or two teams. Everybody else was losing a ton of money. And so the idea is with a cost cap, 140 million down to 135 million, which doesn't account for all costs, which is why you still have teams losing money. Teams are really pushing threading the needle here in terms of what they can keep outside.
Why don't you explain that a little bit? What are some of those things? What are some of those things? Just give me kind of layman's look at what the teams are doing.
Two big things: driver salaries, marketing. Those sit outside of it, but there's some fungible items in terms of how you credit. It's the same kind of stuff that we see in U.S. sports with salary caps in terms of what gets put into basketball-related income, and so what's cleaner is in the NBA you have Adam Silver, you have one person overseeing the whole thing. F1 works a little differently. You have F1, which is part of Liberty Media. You've got FIA, which is the motorsports governing body that oversees the sports, and there's no one like Adam Silver who's overseeing this whole thing. So Red Bull got penalized last year for exceeding the cap. There's talk that a bunch of teams exceeded it for 2022. And so those penalties would come down later in the fall. Right now they're reviewing all the finances. So that's what's going on right now. But long term, actually looking out 5-10 years, the profit picture should look dramatically better than it's looked for decades in this sport.
I want us to take a step back for a second, Kurt, and I'm hoping you can explain to me, because I am a little, this is the rare league that is publicly traded in some way, right? Because it's owned by Liberty Media. You're doing valuations for each of these teams. The enterprise value of F1 via Liberty Media, that includes all of these numbers, or is this is all separate from the enterprise value of F1 itself? I'm a little confused about what these numbers include and what these numbers don't.
Yeah, absolutely. Bernie Ecclestone became a billionaire through his ownership of F1. It works a little differently than the NFL, the NBA,
Yeah.
NHL, where all the money funnels down to the teams for the most part, where some of it stays in the league office, but basically to cover expenses.
Yeah, that's operating expenses, right?
Yeah, and in this case, F1 is a for-profit company that is owned by Liberty, and its revenue is around $3 billion, similar to the total of the 10 teams. But from a valuation standpoint, the stock market's loved it. It's since Liberty launched a separate tracking stock of F1. It's much more profitable than the individual teams because it controls the whole ecosystem, and they distribute part of the profits to teams, about 45% of revenue last year. And what's happened is it's much more profitable. Total return on the stock has been 25% roughly since they launched the tracking stock after Liberty bought F1. Right now, the enterprise value for F1 under Liberty is $18.5 billion, so more than the 10 teams combined, which we value just a tick over $15 billion.
Yeah, and we got a question on this on Twitter. We had put out this kind of list of comparing F1 franchises to other leagues and teams in those leagues, and this idea that NFL, as you said, an NFL game, ticket sales, merchandise, all of that filters down to the team in some capacity. Typically, in a lot of F1 races, right, there's a lot of the economics of events, venues, etc., that also happen outside of both F1 and the teams, right? There's kind of another piece of the equation here being the venue operator. So in some ways, the F1's business, if we're thinking about it relative to American leagues as we do, it's actually even bigger than a lot of the numbers we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Because yes, to your point, you're not folding in those venues. So when they go to Miami, Miami pays a site fee, and that goes to F1, and that's a revenue stream. Media rights are obviously a revenue stream, and then sponsorships. Those ones out at the say league level that sponsor F1 overall. Those are the three real big buckets that Liberty is making money through their ownership of Formula One.
What are the prospects? Go ahead, Eben.
I was just going to say, going back now to the cost cap measures that you're talking about, the F1 has kind of historically had this really bad imbalance of competitive balance, right? You said in your
Major
story,
League Baseball.
Yeah, I mean worse, right? There's three teams: Ferrari, Mercedes, and Red Bull that have won 21 of the past 24 team championships, right? It's been very imbalanced, and Scott and I talk on this show sometimes about how sometimes inequality is good for sports leagues, right? I think the NBA has really benefited from this era of the Warriors and the Cavaliers and the Heat just being dominant teams. How much, or how do you think about the economics of owning an F1 team in this model versus the one that it seems like we're getting towards, where much smaller teams probably do believe, and they say at least that we could have a very competitive racing circuit in F1 in 5 years that we haven't had maybe ever in the sport.
Right. No, 100%. Because the difference is, to some degree, money talks when you're thinking about Major League Baseball payrolls, but we see it all the time, where whether it's the Rays, historically the Oakland A's, the Orioles in recent years, these teams break through and can win. That doesn't happen in F1. You move Max Verstappen to the Williams car, he doesn't win.
Yeah.
It literally doesn't matter. I mean, the driver is 5-10% of the performance. The car is 90% of the performance, and the car is money. Money talks, and so you had those three teams you mentioned: Ferrari, Mercedes, Red Bull. They're spending more than $400 million a year on their budgets, and so now, and you had other teams who were spending $100 million a year. It was impossible to catch up. So the idea is those three teams are still benefiting from the legacy of the billions of dollars that they've sunk into infrastructure and learning every technical nuance that gives them that extra tenth of a second on a lap. And so they will benefit for that for a few years. But to your point, over time, 5-10 years, you will see those teams at the bottom move up. And so those are the ones that have really benefited, I think, from the cost cap and that entry price to buy a franchise where, you guys wrote about it this week in terms of Alpine. it traded hands for a symbolic British £1, last decade, and here they are raising money at more than $900 million. So it's those teams at the bottom that were literally going out of business left and right because they couldn't keep up, and they were just spending themselves into oblivion, and they just wanted to get out of the sport. So those teams at the top have always been extremely valuable, almost ungettable, because Mercedes, although Mercedes has spread its equity around a little bit, but Ferrari's not selling. Red Bull hasn't been looking to raise money. So it's those teams at the bottom now that really have value, have a franchise value that didn't exist before.
We're chatting with Kurt Badenhausen, valuations man extraordinaire. Now, Kurt, let me ask you this, but based on what you just said, let's say you dip into some of the assets of the Badenhausen family office, and you decide that you want to invest in an F1 team. And Max Verstappen comes in and says, I want $10 million a year. Lewis Hamilton comes in and says, I want $10 million a year. Some guy that I don't really know comes in and says, well, I can win with the really good car. Pay me $1 million. Are you telling me, are you taking Verstappen, Hamilton, or the guy, Gasly? What was the first name, Eben?
Pierre Gasly.
Pierre Gasly, yeah. We haven't even mentioned, you hinted at Jerry Cardinal and Ryan Reynolds, and I want to get to that. But if I am Pierre Gasly and I've got Ryan Reynolds coming in, I am feeling really good about my Q rating right about now, or what I think it'll be. Who are you hiring? Who are you spending for, and why?
Well, this is a sponsor-driven sport, so stars help drive eyeballs, engagement. So if you can get Lewis Hamilton in the seat of your car, you want Lewis Hamilton. Verstappen is, in terms of, he's been winning like crazy, but he doesn't carry the same buzz and cachet that someone like Lewis Hamilton does. So he's going to attract those sponsor dollars because he's the Tiger Woods of the sport. And money follows him.
I'm intrigued by this idea that drivers are so little, that the real value of having Lewis Hamilton is not because he's the best driver in the world, but is because when you bring him to the Timex event or whatever it is your sponsor is, that he really does command that much of a presence, that they're more of a kind of a marketing thing.
But is that built on the fact that he's won in the past?
Thing. Well, that's the question, right?
Yeah, so it's right. You have to be the good car to get the reputation exactly.
Yes, yeah. It's a snowball effect, 100%. He's Lewis Hamilton because he has 7 titles, and he's charismatic, and he's got a lot of buzz, and so.
Apropos of nothing, by the way, on my flight down to the Miami F1 race, and I shall protect the name here, but I was with a Ferrari executive sitting next to me, and I thought it was so central casting. It was absolutely perfect. The blazer, the ascot, and then when we landed, I got up and I popped open the bin up top, and there's this like bright red leather bag, and I kind of took it, and I jokingly said to I go, "This yours?" Just think about it as luxury brand, as lifestyle, right? This is a great promotional tool as well. You could have lost money on your F1 team if at the mothership you wind up selling tons and tons of Ferraris. It serves multi-purpose here. It's not just about winning on the racetrack.
Do you think we get to a point again in U.S. sports where their teams are named after brands? Like, it's obviously a very direct through line here that these are engine makers and this is auto sports, but we used to have it in American sports all over.
Like the Nippon
right?
Ham Fighters?
Exactly, right? That
we have it in youth, Eben. Normally it filters down from pro to youth, right? We have this in youth sports. Little Caesars hockey team, Honey Baked hockey team in Detroit, named after, obviously, corporations.
We've got a G League, right, which is Gatorade, right? It's a little different, but I do wonder if at some point, as we talk about a lot on this show, right, about the expanding of who can buy into teams because they're getting so expensive, if corporate ownership as a direct marketing thing at some point comes back.
All right, so Kurt, help me out here. Alpine, big news last week. They sold a piece to Jerry Cardinal, piece to Ryan Reynolds, to Michael B. Jordan's part of that group. Rob McElhenney, also part of the group. What will this team be worth 6 months, 1 year, 5 years from now, if what I anticipate to happen, that flywheel of content, of global appeal, of stardom, what happens to the valuation of that team? Besides, it goes up. I mean, if you can try and quantify what you think that group will do. Because Eben and I talked about on the last show, when we talk about limited partnerships in teams or whatever, the money is great, but everybody has the money these days. What general partners are looking for is what expertise, what are you bringing to the group that helps the overall entity?
100%. And these guys, listen, we see this with other sports leagues. Institutional investors, money people, they are circling these assets. They are checking in every week. People are taking calls every week. Half dozen teams I talk to said, I'm getting calls all the time. I'm looking for the right person. I'm looking for that strategic partner, that person, again, that's going to help me. Audi buying into Sauber. Audi's going to now spend hundreds of millions of dollars and turn that into a really strong brand and race team. The group that's buying into Alpine, they bring a different skill set. I mean, Redbird brings incredible expertise in terms of operating U.S. sports leagues and generating sponsorships and doing events, and they've had fantastic success with that. And the Wrexham guys, they bring buzz. They're going to bring a ton of buzz to this. And so what have they done for Wrexham? It went from zero, right? They didn't pay any money. They just contributed some operating capital, and now it's how much is Wrexham worth now? So that's an infinity return from zero to where it is now. Listen, I think the teams at the bottom have the most opportunity in terms of moving up in value, and really kind of that mid-tier group of teams that we're talking about. Alpine, mid-table club. Alfa Romeo potentially, Aston Martin, they're all in that area where they can jump up. They're not going to catch Ferrari, they're not going to catch Red Bull, but they have an opportunity to move from that $800-900 million range to suddenly being $2+ billion franchises over the next couple of years as more sponsorship revenue comes in, as the profitability picture improves.
Kurt, how did F1? How did they convince the big teams to come along with this? Right, it sounds like F1 a few years ago is what we're seeing in European soccer. Right, there's runaway clubs, there's really valuable ones, there's ones that are at the bottom and will always be stuck at the bottom because they're not going to be able to spend the way that Chelsea and Man U is, and those clubs want more cost caps. Right, the smaller clubs want exactly what F1 is doing. The bigger clubs are standing in the way of that, and they have tremendous power. How is it that in a similar sounding structure, F1 was able to convince, or maybe they didn't even need to, but how is it that they got the F1s and the Ferraris and the Red Bulls to agree to this thing that really benefits their competitors more than it does them?
Yeah, no, 100%. Well, there's a Concord agreement that is in place for 5 years that governs how F1 is run, and they vote on it every 5 years, and everybody's got to get on board. And so what has happened here, though, is under the last Concord agreement, it was the first one that was done under Liberty Media. And so what they did under their ownership. And so they very much went in and said, listen, they've had experience with U.S. sports leagues. And I think they're saying, look at these valuations. A rising tide helps everybody. We can't have three strong partners and then other teams who are just trying to get out of the sport, who are giving their teams away.
That was the old NFL argument years ago. Like Wellington Mara didn't need to be convinced that, okay, great, you're the Giants, you're worth X, but you have to play somebody. You need a counterparty to be successful in the league. He bought in, and obviously, luckily, they had a partner like Wellington Mara who was willing to buy in. I'm sure if Jerry Jones was Wellington Mara back then, that ain't an easy conversation. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying that ain't an easy conversation, okay?
Greg Maffei, Liberty Media CEO, their last conference call, he said, and I'll read what he said. He said, one of the things that we at F1 with Liberty's help have been trying to do is build a mentality that I'll credit the NFL for, which is one league that we benefit when everybody benefits. And so we compete hard, but then we want to grow the entire ecosystem. And that's really what they've said. You're only as strong as your weakest link is the approach that Liberty's taken. And so the prize money, which used to filter much better in terms of the top teams, what they got, they've shrunk the percentages the top teams get, and the teams at the bottom are getting more prize money.
I know there are Liga MX owners that may be listening to this and are nodding so hard that they're hitting their head on the steering
I can
wheel.
name them.
Do we think that again, European soccer is obviously so different because there is promotion and relegation, which hits valuations in a slightly different way. But do we think that European Premier League is looking at what's happening in F1 and saying, oh, maybe if we do institute some kind of cost cap measure here, maybe not just the little teams, but maybe everybody does benefit from certainty on the cash flow, on the balance sheet, that does make the valuations even higher for clubs like Chelsea and Arsenal and Man U, et cetera?
I 100%. And the American owners that have come in and know that American system, they 100% look at it that way. The problem they run into is they're not just competing with each other. And so they're competing in European competition. So
yeah,
do you get the other 4 big leagues to buy in? That's really hard to get everybody on the same page in one league, and then have to worry about what's happening in the other 4 leagues that dominate Champions League. That's the tough sell.
All right, Kurt, let me put you on the spot here because I hear this from American owners who are getting involved in other leagues that, let's just say EPL, let's just say F1, that sort of the marketing flywheel that exists, the stadium revenue is far beyond what a sophisticated American system produces or generates in revenue, that they're bringing the know-how of what American leagues do and how to generate revenue, how to squeeze a nickel from every angle. How far behind, if at all? That's the thesis. That's the hypothesis. Now we will employ a scientific method, and that's just as you talking to people. How far behind the American system of revenue generation are these other leagues?
They're behind. I don't know. Hard to quantify. It is a different model, though. It's great that Arsenal has this gigantic global audience, but it's really hard to monetize. People who are living in poor countries. They're not going to suddenly start spending $100 a year. They might buy one jersey every 5 years. That might be the extent of their spending power. So I think that's trouble. It's hard to just quickly monetize your fan base that might number 400 million people. But
and I don't even think, by the way, you have to stick with poor countries. I mean, anecdote. Just last time I was in London on my taxi ride back to Heathrow. I was talking to my driver who had a 13-year-old son, big Chelsea fan. But could not afford the New Jersey. He just said it was £100 and something. And I mean, a working guy. And he just said, it's just cost prohibitive. I take my son to the one game. He wasn't a season. He takes him to the game, but I don't know where he got the tickets or whatever. But I mean, and sort of that's what that's what we're talking about, which is, just middle class working people cannot afford or don't have the discretionary income to go just buying all this stuff. Yep,
100%. They've made progress in terms of the stadium development. What Tottenham's done has been, is the blueprint for what a lot of people are trying to copy. But they've built this incredible facility that has non-soccer events and popular with the NFL, and so there is room there on the stadium side. But you're not going to suddenly be generating $250 million, $300 million. Like Jerry Jones does from luxury suites and tickets that he's selling at his stadium.
The thing that I've never been to an F1 race, but from what I understand, I think one of the things they've done well, and Scott, you were in Miami this year, is they seem to have understood that building multi-day festival style environments around their races is the thing, right? There's music events, there's qualifying day, and then there's the race day. The people I know who go to events go for 4 days, right? They fly in on Thursday and they leave on Sunday. And that actually seems fairly progressive in some way. U.S. sports, in my opinion, NFL teams, right? They play on Sunday, but the only college football really seems to have embraced this idea of we can put a country singer on the stage right next to the stadium on Friday night, and then they'll play on Saturday. This multi-day thing, F1 actually seems to be, in my opinion, at least a little ahead of the game versus U.S. teams from understanding the kind of event and spectacle around it.
It still had a very, to me, it still had a very premium feel. Everything had a very luxury premium feel, unlike
Intentionally,
when we went to the Indy 500 and we're peeking around and the president of the Speedway is going, that's where the college kids hang out. They don't care about the race, but we're going to, Shaq is spinning tunes over there and we'll get a whole, many thousands of them. They don't care that the cars are going on behind them. They're there just to hang out and be at the concert.
And there's tents. There's
tents
all
and
over.
ain't no feel like that at the F1 Miami race. So just a different. Kurt, stick with us. What do we got? A couple of minutes left. We'd like to touch on a couple of things. Let's go to Eben's favorite topic: fanatics, vertical integration. That's our big joke for years. Before anybody knew who Michael Rubin was and what fanatics did, they were preaching vertical integration. And then to see sort of how it's come to life and what the company is now, we always get our vertical integration
the
joke.
Valuation's gone vertical.
It's gone vertical. Yeah, straight up. Integrate that. Speaking of going up, the price point they are paying for the PointsBet U.S. business, they made a bid. DraftKings made a counter bid. They came back, and it looks now as if Fanatics will indeed get that business and enter that space that DraftKings was trying to sort of. Let me see if I can do a video here. Block them out like it'll box out on a basketball court. Didn't quite work though.
Really interesting little, 2-month-long business feud here between DraftKings and Fanatics, and who knows how long some of the resentment between these two companies lingers moving forward. But you're right. A month and a half ago, Fanatics put in a deal. It looked like it was going to sail through to buy PointsBet's U.S. business for $150 million. Then a couple weeks later, DraftKings said they had put in a non-binding but better offer. It forced PointsBet to go back to both of them and start negotiating. And then ahead of the deadline this week, Fanatics raised its bid, added $75 million to it, so another 50% up to $225. And then DraftKings didn't even submit, from what PointsBet said, didn't even submit a binding offer. So it's unclear if Fanatics even needed to raise the offer at all. But it's going to accelerate Fanatics' push into a lot of new markets. It's going to give them some technology that I'm sure they'll be able to put to use immediately. But to me, the most interesting part of this is kind of the intrigue here between DraftKings and Fanatics, and two companies that were not competitors until two or three months ago and are now increasingly going to be competitors, particularly as I think both of them have these visions of being bigger e-commerce companies. Obviously, Fanatics has done this very well. But I think these two companies are going to clash more and more, and maybe not just in sports betting moving forward.
Now, if memory serves, Steve Cohen, when he got passed over for a promotion years ago, he wound up buying the guy who got the job's house and destroying it. So if you're looking for anecdotes to sort of give you an insight into the
that sounds like a Billions plot line.
Well, what is it based on, right?
I do.
I don't know this about Michael Rubin. So I want to make clear that yes, we've talked to Michael, yes, we have but this is pure supposition that Michael doesn't like. He has a long memory. That's what I would say. That Michael has a long memory, and if he ever buys a house that once belonged to Jason Robbins, I would assume that I'm going to throw the word "raised" in there. That's all. In keeping the linear lead, I'm just guessing. He's not going to forget that. Right?
I think that's probably right. There was some reporting past couple of weeks about a potential that Fanatics and DraftKings were in talks about a potential merger at some point in the last few years, in the way earlier stages of Fanatics trying to plan what its sports betting aspirations were going to look like. That obviously didn't happen, and there very well may be some lingering or feelings that date back to that, maybe even on both sides. But yeah, as I think about the future of Fanatics and their sports betting aspirations, I do think the little tiff here with DraftKings adds a whole new kind of interesting intrigue.
Go ahead, Kurt. Jump in. Your thoughts on Fanatics?
Oh, hockey stick, the valuation. It's unbelievable.
I love Kurt. Goes right to the valuation. I love it.
We've been waiting on this, though. It's.
When are they going public?
We're waiting to see them go public, and I'm fascinated to see how. They've had success in all these different verticals. Is betting going to work? Betting seems to be such a harder animal to tackle. I don't think it's automatically, we've had success here, merchandise, we've done
the thesis
memorabilia,
being,
cards.
Yeah, but the thesis being we have, 90, 100 million people. We have their data. They're on our platform. They buy our stuff. Of course they will utilize whatever bet product that is, and that's the same thing that was with Barstool. But it ain't that easy.
right?
Yeah, I think the thing that really sticks out to me, and I talked to Matt King, who's running Fanatics Sportsbook, about this idea a month ago. But everything Fanatics has done so far, to Kurt's point, is something it can build a moat around, right? It is the dominant, almost monopolistic force in licensed sports apparel, and it's essentially going to do that, I believe, in trading cards in the very near future. Betting is a totally different animal, right? Success in betting is not 95% market share, which it is in some of the other Fanatics businesses. Success for Fanatics market share could be 20% in betting. Who knows, right? This is an industry that Fanatics will never dominate in the way it dominates its other businesses. And that, I think, is an interesting kind of new wrinkle to the portfolio, because so much of Michael's success so far, I think, has been not just seeing white space, but seeing white space that he can dominate and own. And this is going to have to be different.
All right, let's finish up with the NFLPA breaking news right before we hit the record button. The Players Union over the NFL has a new executive director, Lloyd Howell, replacing our friend DeMaurice Smith. Quick little background, former executive at Booz Allen. He was at Carlisle. If you want to just for fun look at education, I love this because we can make assumptions based on this. UPenn undergrad and HBS Harvard Business School MBA. So what we said, Eben, and I think the discussion is, hey Kurt, you go first. The discussion that Eben and I had quickly was that those taking over the unions now, Tamika at the NBPA, coming from Deloitte, and now Lloyd Howell, shows that the main purpose, the main goal of unions is to figure out, I've got this collection of famous athletes that can do a whole lot of things together, or like individuals, but if you can bring that group together, that you can monetize. This is no longer about how do I negotiate the best collective bargaining agreement labor contract. And by the way, the NFL has labor peace. So what is the task of this union at this point in time?
Yeah, 100%. They've been leaving money on the table for decades and just handing.
Oh, newsflash right there. Ho, ho, ho. Look at you speaking in quotables.
There's your headline.
There's your headline. Badenhausen, NFLPA, leaving money on table for decades.
No, but I think they're, to your point, they've aggressively been trying to monetize these rights in a much better way. And I would have said, if they didn't have labor peace, I would have said, it's a challenging situation to come into, because if you think back to the last labor vote, I mean, it's a handful of votes going the other way, no deal. So that was a challenging situation for D. Smith to operate in over the last couple of years. But to your point, I think there is an opportunity to collectively generate more revenue for the individual players by working together.
Oh, no, you can keep going. Kurt doesn't know this. When I put my finger up like this, it's, hey, Eben, let me go one more thing before you jump in. But you could have finished that thought. You want to finish that thought, Kurt?
No, there's so many opportunities out there as we progress in terms of technology, and we've seen with NFTs and all of these other things that if the PA can negotiate collectively, it's an opportunity to certainly generate more money for their individual players.
Look at Kurt, seemingly still bullish on NFTs. Way to go, Kurt. See, now, this is where I like to have fun, Kurt. This is where I like to put a little pressure on Novy-Williams. Because he was going to come in with I can tell when he prepares, I can see he has something good to say. This will be worthwhile. It'll be a nugget roll. Yeah, see, it'll be something good. But see, this is how I will attempt to foil this. I am telling him right now that the onus of closing the show is being put on him. So he is now in his brain. There's like 37% of his brain that is, okay, wait, producer name, wait a minute, how do we close it? What's the thing at the end? So I want to see how he handles getting this last point while not being distracted in the medulla oblongata where he can get this right. Go ahead, Novi, shut it down. You're taking us all the way home.
I will make one more point and then I will close. I think the timing, certainly the timing of this hire, and you mentioned it, Scott, that there's labor peace now for the NFLPA. When D. Smith, who is the previous executive director, when he took over in March 2009, he essentially got tossed right into the deep end of labor negotiations. And D was a lawyer. It was clearly a hire understanding that the next 12 months, 18 months were going to be absolutely critical from a labor negotiation standpoint for the NFLPA. Now the requirement is different because of that labor piece. So I do think that, again, the fact that you have this long stretch where this person does not need to sit across from Roger Goodell and the lawyers and start negotiating things does, I think, give freedom to seek somebody with a different background that I think can do a lot of different things, which Kurt is talking about.
Here comes the pressure point, Kurt. Now he's got to close the show. He's
all right,
thinking
are we
about
wrapping it
it
up here? All right, that is the end of the show. He is Kurt Badenhausen on Twitter at K Badenhausen. The guy laughing and putting pressure on me is Scott Soshnick on Twitter at Soshnick. I am Eben Novy-Williams on Twitter at Novy_Williams. The show is produced. We got two producers essentially now, Keith Zanardi and Aaron Greenewald. So thanks to Keith and Aaron. And Cora Veltman, who is Sportico's digital media editor, would like you to know that you can follow this show wherever you get your podcasts. We are the Sporticast, which is the hub of the Sportico Media Network. Thank you very much.
He loves that
Peace
whole
and good
wherever
night.
you get your podcast. Oh, he can't get that out of his head. Oh, well. Thank you, Kurt.
Thanks for having me.